Hello everyone, welcome back to A Wild Approach, and today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm Macy, by the way, and I'm going to be talking about seedlings and starting seedlings and my new strategy for this. I mean, it's not new, but it's kind of like my new strategy going forward. I'm basically narrowing down my process. I used to do a lot of different things every year, and I used to experiment a lot, and I think I finally found my favorite way to start seedlings, and I'm going to share it with you, and it's a little bit different than the way most people do it, at least from what I've seen over the years and online. So I'm about to talk about something that might be controversial a little bit because a lot of people are in the mindset that you should start your seeds in milk jugs. And I have decided that I'm no longer going to do that for the most part. And why might that be? Well, milk jugs can be a really great method to do winter sowing, but it doesn't really make sense with native plants, and I will explain why in a minute. Now, milk jug method. This method is where you collect milk jugs over the year, or you get milk jugs from your friends, family members, the grocery store, whatever, wherever you could find empty milk jugs or, whatever. So you collect these plastic jugs, and when it's time to winter sow, you put soil in them, you cut them in half, you put holes in the bottom, and you leave a little hinge where you cut it in half so that it can close and open. And you tape that shut, and it kind of becomes a little mini greenhouse / cold frame for the winter for your seeds to grow inside of, outside, out in the elements. And you make sure that you take the lid off of the top of the jug so that water and snow and all of that can get in, like rainwater and all that can get in the lid, so that it's not closed up completely. And this is potentially a great option if you are planting non-native flowers that will grow in your area, but they're not perfectly adapted to your climate. However, remember, if you're planting natives, and native plants that you're planting are native to your area, to your specific ecoregion, climate, zone, whatever you want to call it. I usually call it, I usually talk about the ecoregions, right? If this plant is adapted to your temperatures and your ecoregion, then it does not need a little dome. It does not need a little cold frame, greenhouse, whatever. It does not need that. Now, don't get me wrong. The process can still work. A lot of people do this with their native plants, and it works great. I'm not saying that you can't do this. I'm just saying I have a method that I now use that to me is less work. And I just want to share it with you because I want you guys to have the easiest, most smooth process that you can possibly get your hands on. And I'm not saying that this is like the end-all be-all perfect process, but for me so far, after doing this for roughly 5 or 6 years, I find that this is my favorite process so far. Now, every single process has their downsides and has their flaws or their cons, as well as their pros. So don't get me wrong, every single process, in my opinion, has its drawbacks and its cons. So you do need to think about the plants that you're growing and the seeds that you're choosing, because some plants are going to do better directly sown in your garden, and some plants might do better sown in pots first, and then other plants might do better started indoors first. But for the most part, with natives, I really think most of them just like to be started outside right off the bat, either in a pot or directly sown. However, that being said, I have narrowed down my processes from 5 or 6 different things that I used to do to 2. And here are my 2 different methods. Hey guys, can you do me a quick favor, pretty please? Could you hit the like button and the subscribe button under this video? It really helps me know which videos resonate with you guys. Do you need a short, quick guide to get started in wildlife gardening? Well, turns out I've got just the thing. I just came out with a new free ebook just for you, and it's called A Wild Approach to Gardening 101, and it's available on my website today at macylou.com/shop. It's free, so go check it out. What do you have to lose? Method number 1 is I keep pots that I have, anything that I've planted on this property. Anything that I've planted on this property, I keep the pots, unless the pots just deteriorate and they're just terrible. If they're sturdy enough to be used over and over, I keep them and I reuse them. And these pots that I reuse, I started to use for my winter sowing. Now there's a huge caveat to that, because when you use a milk jug, one of the best parts about using a milk jug for your seeds starting in the winter is it will protect them from squirrels and chipmunks, and well, chipmunks aren't really out and about right now, but it will protect them against squirrels and birds. Squirrels and birds can't really mess with your milk jugs because, they're protected in the dome, right? So, that being said, I don't use the milk jug. So what do I do to protect my pots? I use either window screen or refrigerator shelves and grates from old refrigerators. Okay, so anything you can grab, you can even use hardware cloth. I use that too. So hardware cloth, old refrigerator shelves and grates, or old window screen. So why do I have these materials? Well, my mom gave me the refrigerator shelves years ago as a way to protect seeds from birds. When you direct sow in your garden, you might find that a lot of your seeds just get eaten by the birds. So to protect them from all getting eaten, now some of them still might get eaten, you can put down grates or hardware cloth or window screen, some kind of barrier between the birds and the ground, between the birds and your seeds. And sometimes you have to kind of elevate them off the ground just a little bit, or they can just peck between the protection and just get the seeds anyway. So just keep that in mind. There's strategies for that. And so with this method, with these pots, my new favorite thing to do is to use the biggest pots that I have, because the smaller the pot, the faster they dry out in the spring. So when the spring comes and we get a lot more sun and the seeds start to finally germinate, and they're just like these little baby seedlings and they're super tiny, they're also, they're babies. They're a little bit sensitive, and even though they don't have that milk jug dome, they are still getting a lot of heat. And they do need the light. A lot of them do to germinate. Not all, but a lot of them do need light to germinate. And so they need that sunlight, but it can be pretty intense, and it can kind of dry out the soil if your pots are too small. So this is why I choose my biggest, largest, most sturdy pots. And then I'll have some medium-sized pots too sometimes. So in this footage, you're going to see big pots, and you're going to see medium pots, and you're going to see smaller pots. And I can tell you right now that the best successes I had were in the large and medium-sized pots. And the smallest pots did the worst, but they still did pretty good. But you have to keep up on the moisture levels in the spring, especially in those smaller ones. So in the larger ones, really what happens is you have so much soil in those huge pots that they will hold on to the moisture longer. And so those plants have a lot more time, the roots really can go deep, and they can really kind of be more strong in a sense, because their roots can go deeper and the soil doesn't dry out as quickly. And so my suggestion is to try to use the largest pots and then your medium pots. And if you only have small pots, use that. Basically, use what you have, but remind yourself that the smaller you go, the more you will have to moisten the soil. Because once they germinate, they really want to stay moist. Now, your winter can kind of go like, before they germinate, during your winter time, these things can kind of get dry and then get moist and go back and forth because it's winter time, right? As it snows or as it rains, it's going to get really wet. And then, when it stops raining and stops snowing for a while, it can dry back out. And that's not that big of a deal until they germinate. When they germinate, you really want to be more careful and watch more closely how much moisture is in your pots. And that is like my biggest part of my advice in this video. Because no matter how you're sowing your seeds outdoors, you got to keep up on the moisture levels, once they're germinating. But anyways, so I live in a very hot microclimate and it's really sunny. This whole property faces southeast, like on a hill. So like I also have concrete everywhere. The driveway is gigantic and concrete and just blah. And so it's really hot. And so when these pots are on the concrete, it's really important to also remember that they can burn up and dry out quickly that way as well. And so I highly recommend, if you can invest in it, to get some kind of little pot feet or those rolling pot stands, which I love. I love them for my largest pots. I have one, but I do want to buy some more because I think they're well worth it. Not only do they elevate your pots, but if they have the wheels like mine do, you could just roll your huge heavy pots around and not have to carry these heavy gigantic pots around when you want to move them. So it's really convenient for patio gardening, balcony gardening, driveway gardening, which is a lot of what I'm doing back there with my seedlings. And they're more likely to drain better because they're not like right up against the concrete, and they're less likely to burn because they're not right up against the concrete, right? And so these are tips I have for that. And again, let's just go back to protection. So instead of having a dome, which can cause a lot of issues, which I will get into in a little bit, instead of having that dome like you would with a milk jug, it's just open air, and I protect them with window screen, hardware cloth, or old refrigerator shelves and grates. And you can see that in this video. And because they're in these huge pots, and I don't fill the pots with soil all the way to the brim, because you wouldn't want to do that, because then your water wouldn't stay in the pot. It would just kind of slough off the edge of the pot. So you want to have like at least an inch or two between your soil level and your pot edge, the top of your pot. And what's great about that is your like hardware cloth and your window screen and your refrigerator shelves, or whatever you're using to protect these pots from squirrels and things, can be elevated off the soil level, which keeps them even more protected from the critters, because it's harder for the birds. Like, they can't get their beaks in there and peck at the seeds because it's like an inch or two down from the protective layer to get to the soil level. So they can't really dig in the dirt. They can't steal your seeds. And so this, to me, is my favorite way to do things now, because I don't have to collect milk jugs. I don't have to cut holes in the milk jugs. I don't have to cut the milk jugs in half. I don't have all this prep time, but I do have to have more soil. So what I have done this time is I actually just used a lot of my leftover soil from my pots that I already had, and then, added a little bit more soil to mix in with it that I had in bags. So I had some bagged soil, but I didn't have enough, so I kind of just used all the soil I had, like between the bagged soil that wasn't used yet and the already used soil. Now, important to note, yes, native plants are adapted to your native soil, and they, depending on what kind of soil you have, and as long as you've picked the right plants for the right soil, your native plants are going to be fine in the ground and don't really need fertilizer. But the caveat is, when you're growing in pots, and especially when you're growing them from seed, from little baby seeds in pots, and you're using soil that is like older, like I am, you've got to fertilize in the spring. So after they germinate, in the spring, as it kind of gets warmer and they're germinating and they're growing a little bit, then you could start fertilizing. And the kind of fertilizer I use is a liquid organic fertilizer from a company that I've heard a lot of good things about. And so and by the way, I'm not sponsored, so anytime I mention any names of any companies, I'm not sponsored by them yet in any way. So if I ever have a sponsor, I'm going to be telling you guys that I'm sponsored. But no, I'm not sponsored right now. So anytime I say a brand name, just know that in this video and any kind of, current videos. But okay, so a liquid organic fertilizer. Now, I just do a little bit of this. I follow the directions on the bottle, and I just do a little bit of this in my winter sowing pots after they've germinated, once spring comes. Because I do this because I found out the hard way that just because they are native plants and that they don't really need fertilizer in the ground, that does not mean that they can live without fertilizer in pots. I learned that the hard way. I think it was 2023. Like, almost all of my seedlings died. It was a horrible year. And I learned the hard way that I really needed to be fertilizing in the spring. And I really needed to be watching really closely the moisture levels and thinking about what soil I was using as well. It was kind of a multi-pronged issue. I think I used the wrong soil. I didn't fertilize. And I let things get too dry too often. And it was just a mess. So, but I think the main issue was I wasn't fertilizing in the spring. And again, you shouldn't have to fertilize them at all in the winter. Now, remember, I am not a professional, and I am a home gardener that knows only what I've learned during this process. So if I'm wrong about that last part, if I'm wrong that you need fertilizer in the winter, I apologize. But everything I've learned over the years, every video I've watched, everybody says, From what I've seen, everybody says, like, don't fertilize when things are dormant or about to go dormant. Only fertilize when things are starting to grow or they are currently growing. So if that's correct, then I should be on the right track here. And that's what I did last year, 2024. And that worked great for me. I didn't fertilize in the winter, because everything, it's just seeds. There's not even any germination yet, They're just sitting there, and you're just trying to give them cold stratification at that point in the winter in their pots, right? And once spring comes, that's when they're supposed to break dormancy if they've had enough cold stratification time, which we will talk about that in a moment. And then in the spring, they are going to want some nutrition so that they can keep growing past the seed stage. So, germination is one thing, but after germination, they're going to be wanting some nutrition, okay? And so use the liquid feed, and of course I follow the directions. So you dilute it with water if you get the kind of liquid feed that I get. And it's an organic type of feed, because I don't want to use anything, I know that any fertilizer could be, not great for the environment. So I try to at least make it organic so that I'm reducing the amount of harm, hopefully, that I'm doing by using fertilizer, because using fertilizer in general is not the best thing to do. But anyways, that's beside the point. It depends on the fertilizer too, I'm sure, but I'm not a professional. So I just do what I can with what I have. And if I don't have something, then I try and get it if I have the budget for it. And that's what I've done. I've gotten a liquid organic fertilizer specifically for seedlings in the spring. So I can't really tell you how often to fertilize, because it's really going to depend on what potting soil you used. It's going to depend on just so many factors. It's going to depend on whether or not your potting soil had fertilizer in it or not. And it's going to just depend on the plant, probably. Like, some plants need a little bit more attention than others. And so I can't really tell you how often to fertilize, because it also depends on the brand that you use. I mean, some brands might tell you to do it once a week, and some brands might tell you to do it once a month. You know, it depends. I kind of just went off of vibes. I read the instructions, and I kind of did a little bit less fertilizing than what maybe people would do for non-natives, because I was like, okay, they're natives, so they don't need as much nutrition, but they still need some nutrition. So that's how my brain worked, and I was just like, okay, I'll just give them a little bit of this feed, you know, maybe like this week, and then maybe I do it next week, but then I skip the next week, or maybe I just do it every other week, or maybe I do it this week and then I skip a couple weeks. You know, I can't really remember how often I did it, but I kind of went off of how are they doing? How are they growing? If they started to kind of seem like they needed more food, I'd give them more food. If they were growing well and they didn't really seem like they needed much, I wouldn't give them more after that. Does that make sense? I hope so. But either way, I didn't just not feed them. I made sure all of my seedling pots got this liquid food, because I learned my lesson from last year and everything dying last year, or 2023. And so anyways, that is that over there. And then we're going to talk about cold stratification, because I just said we were going to come back to that. So cold stratification is not something that every single native plant needs, but a lot of native plants need it. Some asters don't need it, and some native warm season grasses don't need it. But make sure you look that up and do your own research about every single plant that you want to grow, because every single plant can be different and are different. And so some native plants need 60 days cold stratification. Some of them only need 30 days. Some of them don't need any cold stratification at all. And so it's really important for you to find out what your plants need, because that's going to inform what you do and when you seed. So as of recording this video right now, it is Thursday, January 16th. Some native plants just, you can't just put outside right now, like seed-wise, because they won't get enough cold stratification because it's already mid-January. But some plants need so little cold stratification that this might be the perfect time to put them outside, directly sown in pots or in the ground as seeds right now. But for the plants that need more time than what is left of winter, and this depends on where you live and what your climate is, I still have the rest of January, all of February, and then part of March, you know, for my cold season. And so, you know, I could start a lot of things right now, but there are some things that I wouldn't really want to risk. And one of those would probably be a 90-day stratification. So if something needs like a 90-day stratification, and I just now decided I was going to plant them and grow them, what I would do right now is I would go ahead and I would prepare a baggie for them with, I think it's called perlite. Oh my gosh, it's going to be on the screen. I forget if it's perlite or vermiculite. Oh my gosh, I think it's perlite. But you can also use vermiculite. I've even used like potting soil or like seed starting mix or something like that too. I forget which. I think seed starting mix, but you can use almost any of these substrates. You just wouldn't want to use something that's really like composty or something that would really mold really quickly. You don't want anything like that. You want it to be as sterile as you can get it for this method I'm about to talk about. So that's why a lot of people use vermiculite or perlite or something like that. So anyway, you want to get a plastic baggie. You want to put your perlite or your vermiculite or sand or whatever in it. And the sand would need to be a certain kind of sand. It would need to be a sterile sand, by the way. You don't want just any kind of sand. And you moisten it, and you put your seeds in it. And you put it in the fridge. Now, I like to put it in the fridge drawer. Not the freezer. The fridge. And in the drawer. And you don't want it too wet, but you don't want it too dry. You want it slightly moistened. And what this is this is going to mimic the cold stratification of the outdoors. And you might be like, well, why aren't you just planting them outside? Well, like I said, if it's mid-January and these seeds need 90 days of cold moist stratification, well, that's a big risk. that's probably not going to be enough time for me to put them outside in mid-January and then have a whole 90 days of cold. It could be, but it might not be. And so rather than risk it, it'd be better to just put them in these baggies, label them, and put them in the fridge for the full 90 days, and then, put the seeds in pots later in the spring, or early summer, after they've had all those 90 days in the fridge. This is because you will get better germination if you do this. So, it's really important that you pay attention to what cold stratification your specific plants need. So what I do with these baggies is I write the name of the plant, the date that I put them in the baggie, which means it's the day I'm putting them in the fridge. That's really important. If you're bagging all this stuff up and you're not immediately putting it in the fridge, then that date's not going to make sense. So the date that I put them in the fridge, I put that on the baggie, put the name of the plant on the baggie, and then I put the date that I can take them out and plant them out. And then I also put the amount of days. So like 60 days, 90 days, whatever it is for the cold stratification requirement, I write that on the baggie too. But I don't want to have to do the math in the spring because I'm going to be busy. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys can agree with this. Like, spring is a very busy time for a gardener. And the last thing I want to do is have to sit there and look at my baggie and it says something like January 1st is when it was put in the baggie. And then, it just says 60 days. And I'm like, okay, what's the math of that? It's like January 1st might not be that big of a deal, but if you pick a date like January 8th or something, you know what I mean? You just don't want to have to do that math and look at a calendar and make sure you have the exact 60 or 90 days. So I like to do that work in the winter when I'm putting them in the fridge to start with. That way, I don't have to do the math later. I go ahead and I write the date that they can go out in the garden. April 15th, May 10th, whatever it is. I put that date on there too, underneath the in date. So I have an in date and an out date and the name of the plant and the number of days, just so I have all the information and I'm not confused and I don't have to do a bunch of math in the spring. And then I put them in the fridge drawer and I shut it. And I just move on with my winter, do my thing. Now, in the spring, I would be getting these out and I would be, getting soil in pots, and I would make sure my pots were clean. I don't really go crazy. I just wash them, rinse them off, and dry them off, and then they're clean. In the spring, I wait till it's warmer for that because I don't really enjoy doing that in the cold. I've done it. It's too chilly to be getting wet. So I wait till it warms up a little bit for that. But then I put the soil in the pots, and I follow the instructions on how deep the seed needs to be planted in the pot. And then, before I put the seed in, I actually moisten the soil first because you don't want your seeds to wash away. So moisten the soil first, then push your seed in however far it needs to be, and whether or not it needs to be covered with soil or not. And then you just sit it in a spot that it would like to grow. Like if it's a more sun-loving plant, put it in the sun. If it's a more shade-loving plant, put it in the shade. And then just protect it from the squirrels and the birds, just like you did with your other pots we talked about earlier in the video, window screen, hardware cloth, whatever you have, whatever you can get your hands on within your budget. And then just sit them and wait for them to germinate. And then when they germinate, same thing I said earlier, fertilize with that organic liquid feed. So it's really the same process. It's just one of them is I started these pots outside in, November, December, or January, early January, and they had plenty of time to germinate outside and fertilize in the spring versus, I didn't get these seeds ready to go by, early winter, so now it's like mid to late winter, and I still want to grow these, so now I have to pop them in the fridge for a few weeks, a few months, whatever it is, so they have plenty of time to cold stratify. And then I'm going to do the rest of that same process, putting them out in the spring in pots and protecting them. So it's really simple. It's my new favorite ways to do this, because I don't have to fiddle with all these jugs. I don't have to fiddle with flats, which I'll talk about flats too. Oh my gosh, I need to talk about the jugs and the flats for a minute. So I hate the cell tray flats. I hate them with a passion, but I also understand what they are used for and why I don't like them. So the cell tray flats, which I'm going to show right now, they dry out really quickly, and it's probably my microclimate. Like I said, I have a hot microclimate. You know, if they're outdoors, they dry out really quickly, and then when it rains, they flood like crazy. So the problem is, if you're not paying attention like every single day, which this is what I consider babying them. If I have to pay attention to the weather forecast every single day and I have to baby these things, it's not going to go well. And so so the seedling trays just don't work for me, because if you don't have the catchment tray under your little cells, then they're going to dry out. In my yard, they're going to just dry out, and it's going to be awful. But then when you put the tray underneath of them to hold the rainwater and to keep them moist, then they're going to flood. And I hate it so much. I absolutely hate it. So now I have come to the conclusion that these are only for people who are going to grow under grow lights indoors or in a greenhouse, something like that. Because to me, they make 0 sense for outdoor growing. And maybe I was supposed to know that all along, but hey, guys, I didn't, okay? I didn't know. I was just trying them as winter sowing. And I know that sounds funny. Maybe a lot of you were like, well, duh, of course you're going to have issues. I sometimes have to do things hands-on to learn them. Like, I'm just a hands-on kind of person, always have been. And so I needed to know for myself, I guess. But yeah, so if you want to know a good use for those little cell trays, to me, they would have been great if I would have done them with my indoor light. So in this video, you're going to see some seedlings I grew indoors under grow lights last year, and they did really well. They didn't need any cold stratification because they were things like native warm season grasses, asters, purple coneflower, stuff like that. And by the way, guys, a lot of you think that you have to cold stratify purple coneflower, but you don't. You don't have to stratify. You don't have to cold stratify purple coneflower. You don't. You just don't. Now, maybe it will give you better germination if you do. I don't know. I've just not had to do it. Because I was told a long time ago that you don't have to do that, so I don't do it, and they do fine. So, if you don't want to have to cold stratify some things, just look up what the plants are that don't need it, which I think wild bergamot is one that doesn't need it. Purple coneflower doesn't need it. A lot of our native warm season grasses like switchgrass doesn't need it. I don't think Sidotes grama needs it. Indian grass, I don't think Indian grass needs it. There's a lot of warm season grasses that don't need it. There's a lot of asters that don't need it. Bergamot and purple coneflower don't need it. So just FYI, you don't have to cold stratify everything, okay? But anyway, so the cell trays, they would have been great for under the grow lights, you know, just growing indoors, especially things that don't need don't need cold stratification. That would have been fantastic. In fact, I'm kind of tempted to try that this year. Even though I haven't done any indoor seedlings this year. Like I said, I told you my 2 favorite methods now, and so that kind of leaves out the indoor seedlings. But I'm tempted to try the cell tray thing in here under the grow light, because that just seems so fun and easy. But anyways, okay, the last thing I want to talk about is the milk jugs. I'm going to bring it back to the milk jugs again. So these milk jugs, because it's a dome, because it's a little mini greenhouse, and because it is kind of like a cold frame mini greenhouse situation, when the temperatures change and when we transition from winter to spring, you have to baby them, because you have to check on them constantly and make sure, is it too cold? Is it too hot? Is there enough moisture? Blah, 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 blah. Because if you don't, they can dry out because of all that greenhouse effect. You know, when the sun is coming in on them through the dome and it's getting warmer outside, it can get too hot in that little jug, and it can really dry out your soil. And I had some seedlings actually not make it because of this. So you've got to open them up, let them have air circulation, and then, when they're opened up, they're not really protected because they're open. So then you got to protect them, right? So it's just a pain in the butt. And I just don't recommend milk jugs unless you're going to grow something that's not native, that is a beautiful flower that you want to grow, but it's not native, and you just want a jump start on it. Basically, anything you want a jump start on that's not native, but that's still hardy in your area, that's usually what the milk jugs are actually good for. If it's native plants, it's just more work for yourself. Like, just make it easier on yourself, just make it easier for yourself. So I think my biggest tips are, no matter what method you use, check the cold stratification requirements, check the light requirements, check the, the moisture requirements. Check these things before you grow whatever you're going to grow. And whatever you do, if it's outdoors, protect it with cages or fencing or hardware cloth or window screen, something where the water can get through, but the birds and the squirrels can't. Okay? Because you still want water to get through, and because you want the rain and the snow to automatically water your seeds for you, you want to do as little work as possible, because it's going to make it more fun for you. In the spring, when they're just starting to germinate and you're fertilizing them, and then they grow over the spring months and into maybe early summer, and then maybe you can plant them out. Some things you can plant out in early summer, but then some things need a little bit more time, and some of these things you might not be able to really plant till the fall. So, if it's something that you can't really plant till the fall, you are going to have to stay on top of the watering in the summer. So that's a downside. One other downside to my methods is that, because they're being grown outdoors in pots in amazing, loose soil, things are going to germinate in these pots that you did not plant. So anything from your more aggressive native self-sowers, like, for instance, your aggressive goldenrods and your aggressive asters. Yeah, how do I know? Because I have aggressive goldenrods and aggressive asters that I love very, very much. But they do self-sow in these pots that I'm talking about. And in the video, you've probably seen the footage that of me with little tweezers pulling out some of those goldenrods and asters from my seedling pots. Because you will have to weed these pots. You will have to weed these pots if you have any self-sowing natives nearby, especially the aggressive ones. So keep that in mind. It's going to be a little bit of maintenance in the spring, but to me, this is still less work than the jugs. I no longer like the jugs. I don't stand the jugs. And there's one last reason that I hate the jugs, but I love the big pots, and that is sturdiness and longevity. So the milk jugs have only lasted 1, maybe 2 years for me max, and then they start to completely break into pieces and shatter and crumble, and then you have little pieces of plastic everywhere, and it's really annoying. And the tape, when you put the tape around the milk jugs, the tape can deteriorate over the months in the sun, and the tape can fly away in the wind, and it's just a lot of litter that I don't want. But when I use these made for outdoors pots, or made for liquid, some of these are wash pots. What is it called? Wash bins? Wash pots? Things you wash your laundry in? I forget what they're called. Some of these are actually laundry pots that you wash your laundry in. So they're meant for water, they're meant for the outdoors, they're meant for weathering. And some of them are just, nursery pots that are really big that are sturdy, and yeah, they're plastic and plastic sucks, but I would rather use pots that I can just reuse every single year for like 5 years, 7 years, maybe even 10 years, and will hold up for a really long time, rather than using these milk jugs that are too small. You have to fiddle with them so much, and they break apart and shatter after like 1 or 2 years. But no judgment if you use milk jugs, because I used to use milk jugs, so I'm not going to judge. We all start somewhere, and I just really hope that this video is helpful. And you know what? If milk jugs are all you can get your hands on because, you drink a lot of milk or you drink a lot of orange juice, and they're free for you in a sense because you've already used them once, totally more power to you. I definitely am not going to judge you for that. Not at all. I'm just trying to make everyone's life easier. And if you have a little bit of money to buy some big pots that you're going to have for years to come, or if you just, keep the pots that maybe you had from anything you planted, if you planted a tree, just anything like that, any of these larger, medium-sized pots are really helpful for this project. And so just try to keep those around so you can reuse them. And yeah, so that's my recommendation. I hope this video was helpful. I know it was long-winded, but I hope you can understand why I do it this way. One other thing I do want to mention is when you have something like a pawpaw tree, I had a pawpaw tree growing in one of my big pots. Keep in mind that they can send out a very deep root. And since you have a big pot, that root's just going to keep going. And so you might have to get the big shovel and dig in your pot almost like it's the ground because it's just so deep, right? So keep that in mind. Some of your plants might actually root really deeply in these pots because they're so happy, with you keeping on the moisture levels and with them being in, soil that's really loose and easy to grow in, and then the fertilizing that you're doing. It could really make those roots go deep. And so just keep that in mind. Make sure you are prepared for the a little bit more difficult digging of them out of the pots. That is a little bit more difficult than dealing with, the cell trays or the little pots that you can just yoink them out of. So I will give you that, but I still prefer it. So we'll see this spring how it goes. I may change my mind, but for now, I really like doing it this way, and I hope this video has been helpful for you guys. Leave me a comment down below, whether you love this video or hate this video. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. How controversial was this opinion? Do you hate milk jugs? Do you love milk jugs? What's your favorite way to grow your native plants? Do you have multiple different ways, like I do, to grow your native plants from seed? Let me know, and I will talk to you next time. Bye, guys. Hey guys, don't forget to follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. These are the 2 best social media accounts other than YouTube where you can find me and you can see me post photos of the garden, thoughts on wildlife, and more. So don't forget to follow me over there. Brand new items are now available in the shop. Thanks so much to viewers like you for supporting the channel. To support the channel, like the video, comment, and subscribe. You can also support my work by buying art from me at macylou.com. Thanks for watching!